At 11:32 on the morning of December 20th, 1943, Second Lieutenant Charles L. Charlie Brown gripped the controls of his B-17F Flying Fortress bomber high over Bremen, Germany. He watched as hundreds of anti-aircraft guns opened fire on his formation. At just 21 years old, with 0 combat missions completed, this was his very first. The German anti-aircraft gunners below were not ordinary soldiers. They were elite trainees from an officer candidate school, some of the best marksmen the Luftwaffe had, and they had been waiting all morning for the American bombers. Brown's aircraft was named Year-Older Pub. It carried a crew of 10 men and 6,000 pounds of bombs. Their target, the Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter aircraft production facility on the outskirts of Bremen. Intelligence briefings had warned the crews they would face hundreds of German fighters. What they did not mention was that the position assigned to Brown's bomber, the low left rear, was the most dangerous slot in the formation. The men of the 379th Bombardment Group called it Purple Heart Corner, the exposed edge where German fighters always attacked first, because defensive fire from neighboring bombers could not overlap effectively. New crews were often placed there. Brown's crew was the newest of all. Before Year-Old Pub could release its bombs, flak exploded around them. A direct hit shattered the plexiglass nose. At 27,000 feet, temperatures were 60 degrees below zero. Icy wind howled through the aircraft at over 150 mph. The No. 2 engine was knocked out instantly. The No. 4 engine began overspeeding, forcing Brown to throttle it back to prevent catastrophic failure. The bomber slowed dramatically. The formation pulled ahead. Within seconds, Year-Older Pub was alone and lagging. German fighters spotted it immediately. A swarm of 12 to 15 Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s descended on the crippled bomber like wolves on a wounded deer. The attack lasted more than 10 minutes. The No. 3 engine took hits and dropped to half power. The oxygen system ruptured. Hydraulic lines burst. The electrical system failed. The tail section was shredded by cannon fire. Sergeant Hugh Eckie Eckenrode, the tail gunner, took a direct 20mm cannon shell hit. He was killed instantly. Most of the other crew members were wounded. Brown himself was hit by a bullet fragment in his right shoulder. The extreme cold froze the oil in the defensive guns. Of the B-17's 10-13 50 caliber machine guns, depending on configuration, only a few remained operational. Then the oxygen ran out. At 27,000 feet, without supplemental oxygen, the human brain cannot function properly. Brown's vision narrowed. His hands went numb on the controls. Beside him, co-pilot Pinky Luke was already unconscious. Brown's last thought, before blacking out, was that his crew was about to die on their very first mission. Ye-Olde Pub entered an uncontrolled dive. It plummeted from 27,000 feet, airspeed climbing past 300 mph. The airframe shook violently. At any moment the wings could shear off from the stress. But then something extraordinary happened. At around 1,000 feet above the ground, the thicker air revived Brown enough for him to regain consciousness. He grabbed the controls and pulled back with every ounce of strength he had left. The B-17 leveled out just above the treetops of northern Germany. Brown looked around the cockpit. Blood everywhere, wounded men everywhere. His tail gunner was dead. His bomber was riddled with holes, and he had just flown low over a German fighter airfield. On that airfield, Luftwaffe pilot Franz Stiegler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6. He had already shot down 2 American bombers that morning. One more heavy bomber kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. He looked up and saw Year-Olde Pub limping across the sky at barely 100 to 200 feet. If you want to hear what Franz Stigler did when he caught up to Brown's dying bomber, please hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this story with more people. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Stigler. He climbed into his fighter. The engine roared to life. Within minutes, he was airborne and closing fast on the crippled American bomber. He positioned himself behind the B-17's tail, finger on the trigger of his twin 13mm machine guns and 20mm cannon. One squeeze. That was all it would take. The Knight's Cross would be his. But what Franz Stigler saw through his gun sight changed everything he believed about war, honor, and the enemy he had been taught to hate. Franz Stigler was 28 years old. He had flown hundreds of combat missions. He had been shot down multiple times, bailed out of burning aircraft, and crash-landed damaged planes. His brother August, also a pilot, had died in 1940 when his Ju-88 crashed during a night bombing mission over England. The war had taken everything from Stigler except his skill and his personal code. Before the war, Stigler had been a commercial pilot for Lufthansa, flying passengers across Europe in peacetime. He never imagined he would spend years killing strangers. By December 1943, he was one of the most experienced pilots in Jagdgeschwader 27, with around 22-27 confirmed victories. Now he was closing on the tail of a crippled B-17. One more heavy bomber would qualify him for the Knight's Cross, honoring not just him, but his dead brother. His Bf-109 G6 was not in perfect condition. Earlier that morning, during attacks on two other bombers, an American .50 caliber bullet had lodged in his radiator. The engine risked overheating, but Stigler took off anyway. The crippled B-17 was too tempting a target. He approached from the classic rear-below angle. His finger rested on the trigger. His gun sight settled on the tail. And then Franz Stigler saw something that made him lift his finger away. The tail gunner's compartment was destroyed. Through massive holes in the fuselage, he could see the body of a young American, slumped over his gun. Blood had frozen into icicles from the shattered turret. The man was clearly dead. Stigler pulled alongside and looked through more holes. He saw wounded men trying to aid other wounded men. He saw a crewman with blood covering his face, another with a leg torn open by shrapnel. He saw the pilot and co-pilot struggling to keep the aircraft aloft. None were fighting back. They were just trying to survive. In that moment, Stigler remembered the words of his former commander in North Africa, Gustav Rödel. Rödel had told his pilots, "You fight by rules to the last. If I ever hear of any of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." A man in a parachute was defenseless. Killing him was murder, not combat. The Americans weren't in parachutes, but they might as well have been. No working guns, no speed, no defense. Shooting them down would not be a victory. It would be an execution. Stigler felt the rosary beads in his flight jacket pocket. His mother had wanted him to become a priest. He chose flying instead, but he never abandoned his faith. His faith told him this would be a sin. He made his decision. Franz Stigler would not shoot down this bomber. He would not kill these men. He would not earn his Knight's Cross this way. But now he faced a new problem. The American bomber was flying deeper into Germany, the wrong direction. If Brown continued, he would cross more airfields, more flak batteries, more fighters. Someone else would finish them. Stigler had spared them, but sparing them wasn't the same as saving them. Stigler pulled his Bf-109 alongside the B-17's cockpit. He could see the American pilot staring at him through the shattered window, face covered in blood, eyes filled with terror, expecting death any second. Stigler raised his hand and pointed down toward the ground, trying to signal, land and surrender. It was the only way to survive, but Charlie Brown did not understand. He thought the German was telling him to crash and die. Brown shook his head. Stigler pointed again. this time north toward neutral Sweden. If they reached Sweden, they would be interned but alive, with medical care. Brown still didn't understand. He kept flying west toward England, 250 miles across the freezing North Sea, in a bomber that was disintegrating. Stigler realized he had only one option left, an option that could get him executed for treason in Nazi Germany. A pilot who allowed an enemy aircraft to escape faced court-martial and firing squad. Stigler made the most dangerous decision of his life. He would escort the American bomber to safety. He maneuvered his Bf-109 into close formation on the B-17's left wing, so close the aircraft nearly touched. From the ground, the silhouettes would merge. German gunners might assume it was a captured B-17 being escorted by a Luftwaffe fighter for training or a secret mission, and hold fire. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the Americans' only chance. Inside Ye Old Pub, Charlie Brown watched the German fighter slide into position. His heart pounded. He ordered his top turret gunner not to fire. Brown didn't understand. Was this a trick? Was the German calling reinforcements? The B-17 continued west. The Germans stayed. With it, mile after mile. They passed over farmland, villages, roads filled with German vehicles. At any moment, a flak battery or fighter could appear, but the minutes passed, and the German kept flying beside them. The coastline appeared, the North Sea. 250 miles of freezing water to England. If they made it, the crew would live. If the engines failed over water, they would die. Stigler stayed in formation, wingtip nearly touching the fuselage, daring gunners to shoot and risk hitting him too. The coastal batteries held fire. Radar tracked two aircraft in formation and assumed friendly Ye Old Pub crossed the coast and headed out over the grey North Sea. Franz Stigler had done it. He had escorted an enemy bomber through the most heavily defended airspace in Europe and saved 9 American lives. But Stigler could not follow to England. His fuel was low. His radiator was damaged. Landing in Britain meant becoming a POW. He had to turn back and pretend nothing happened. Stigler pulled alongside the cockpit one last time. Charlie Brown stared at him through the shattered window. Their eyes met. 2 young men from opposite sides of a terrible war, separated by feet of frozen air. Stigler raised his hand to his forehead in salute. Then he banked left and disappeared into the grey sky, heading home. Brown watched him go. He still didn't understand what had happened or why he had been spared. All he knew was that a man who could have killed him had chosen to let him live. But Charlie Brown's ordeal wasn't over. He was now 250 miles from England in an aircraft barely flying, 2 engines out or severely damaged, hydraulic system destroyed, no oxygen, no heat, no radio, 1 man dead, several wounded, morphine frozen solid. The North Sea in December was lethal, water barely above freezing. Ditching meant minutes before hypothermia. Brown flew on 1.5 engines at dangerously low speed. He coaxed power from the damaged engines. The aircraft shuddered but held. Behind him, his crew fought to survive, applying pressure to wounds, battling frostbite, trying to repair the radio. After what felt like eternity, the English coast appeared. Brown spotted RAF seething and lined up, the landing gear barely extended, flaps partially worked. He brought Ye Old Pub in for a controlled crash, tearing off gear, skidding across the tarmac in sparks. When it stopped, Charlie Brown sat motionless, hands locked on the controls, body shaking. He had brought his crew home. 8 men climbed out alive. 1 was carried out dead. The bomber never flew again. It was scrapped. At debriefing, Brown described the German fighter that flew alongside instead of attacking, and the salute. Intelligence officers listened in silence, then ordered him never to speak of it again. The story was classified. No sympathy for the enemy. 300 miles away, Franz Stiegler landed near Bremen. He told no one. If discovered, he faced execution. Both men carried the secret. The war ended in 1945. Charlie Brown returned to West Virginia, finished college, rejoined the Air Force, served in intelligence, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1972, and settled in Miami with a combustion research company. Franz Stiegler survived, flew the Me-262 jet in the war's final months, then immigrated to Canada in 1953. He became a successful businessman in Vancouver. Both carried the memory of December 20th, 1943. Brown wondered about the German pilot. Stiegler wondered if the bomber made it. The secret lasted 46 years. In 1986, at a gathering of Eagles or similar event, Brown finally shared the story publicly. He began searching for the German pilot. After years of dead ends, archives, historians, letters, he wrote to the German pilot's newsletter Jägerblatt in 1989-1990. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Canada. I was the one. Franz Stiegler had recognized the details instantly. He learned the bomber had survived. Brown called directory assistants in Vancouver. They found Stiegler's number. When Stiegler answered, there was a long pause, then tears. They talked for hours. They discovered they had lived less than 200 miles apart for years. They met in person in 1990 in Florida. Two old men, Brown 67, Stiegler 74, embraced and wept. A friend filmed it. Brown showed photos of his children and grandchildren, all because Stiegler spared them. Months later, at a 379th Bomb Group reunion in Massachusetts, surviving crew members, like waist gunner Alex Yelisanko, radio operator Richard Pechout, met Stiegler. They embraced him. He became an honorary member. 25 descendants owed their existence to Stiegler's choice. The story spread. Newspapers, TV, speeches. In 1993, Stiegler received the Star of Peace for wartime humanity. In 2008, the U.S. Air Force investigated declassified files. Surviving crew received Silver Stars. Charlie Brown received the Air Force Cross for extraordinary heroism. In 2012, Adam Makos published A Higher Call, a New York Times bestseller. In 2014, Sabaton released No Bullets Fly. In 2019, a restored B-17 was painted as Ye Old Pub. Franz Stiegler died March 22, 2008 at 92 in Vancouver. Charlie Brown died November 24, 2008 at 87 in Miami, 8 months apart. Stiegler once inscribed a book to Brown. In 1940, I lost my only brother. On December 20th, 1943, 4 days before Christmas, I was able to save a B-17 from its destruction. Your brother, Franz. This is not just a war story. It's a story of honor transcending nationality, mercy echoing across generations. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like shares it further. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories of real heroism every day. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany? Did someone in your family serve? Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching and for keeping Charlie Brown and Franz Stiegler remembered. These men deserve it.